At 68 years old, I learned that silence can be louder than any argument. I sat at my son Tyler's dinner table while his wife Vanessa leaned forward and said, "Maybe it's time for Dad to find his own space." Tyler stared at his plate like it held all the answers. The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. This was my house. The house I built with my own hands 40 years ago. The house where I raised Tyler after his mother died. But as I looked around the dining room I'd crafted from reclaimed oak, I realized I was being treated like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Vanessa's smile was sharp as a blade, and Tyler's silence cut deeper than any harsh words could have. Before I continue, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And please consider clicking the like and subscribe button if you believe in standing up for your own legacy. I smiled back and said nothing, but something inside me shifted. They thought they were dealing with a tired old man. They had no idea they were about to wake up something my late wife Helena had put in motion years before she passed. The next morning brought fresh humiliation. I was reading the newspaper in what used to be my favorite chair when Vanessa swept into the living room like she owned the place. Her eyes landed on the coffee table I'd built for Helena's birthday 25 years ago. Every curve, every joint, every grain pattern held a memory. "Tyler," she called to the kitchen, "this table really doesn't fit our aesthetic anymore." She ran her perfectly manicured fingers along the walnut surface I'd spent weeks perfecting. "It's so rustic. Our friends are coming for dinner next week, and honestly, it looks like something from a garage sale." Tyler appeared in the doorway, dish rag in hand, and just nodded. No defense. No recognition of the countless hours I'd spent shaping that wood, or the tears Helena had shed when I surprised her with it. I watched my son's face, searching for any sign of the boy who used to sit beside me in the workshop, eager to learn. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who let his wife erase our family's history one piece at a time. 3 days later, Vanessa dropped the final blow over breakfast. She set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision and looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. "We're hosting an investor meeting here next Friday," she announced. "It's crucial for Tyler's promotion. The house needs to look perfect." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I think it would be best if you made yourself scarce that evening. Maybe find somewhere else to be." Tyler buttered his toast with the focus of a surgeon, avoiding eye contact. I waited for him to speak up, to defend me, to show even a spark of the backbone I'd tried to teach him. But he just chewed in silence. The betrayal wasn't in Vanessa's words. I expected nothing from her. The betrayal was in Tyler's cowardice, in his willingness to let her push his own father out. That night, I packed a small bag with my essentials and one precious item. A thick leather folder Helena had left me with strict instructions. "Use this only when you have no other choice," she'd written. As I walked out the front door I'd hung myself, I knew I'd reached that point. The motel room was clean but soulless. Beige walls, generic art, the smell of industrial cleaning products. It was the perfect place to disappear, which was exactly what I needed. I sat on the stiff mattress and finally opened Helena's folder for the first time since her funeral 3 years ago. Her handwriting, elegant and precise, filled page after page. Land deeds, legal documents, photographs, and a letter addressed to me in her careful script. "My darling William," it began. "If you're reading this, it means someone has forgotten who you are and what you've built. They see only an old man in their way. They don't see the master craftsman, the business owner, the foundation of everything they take for granted." My hands trembled as I read on. Helena had been preparing for this moment, documenting everything, building a case I didn't even know existed. She'd seen what I'd been too loyal to recognize, that some battles require more than love and patience. Sometimes they require proof and consequences, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from truly knowing your enemy. Tyler's first call came at 7 in the morning, 2 days after I'd left. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tight with something that might have been a worry, but sounded more like inconvenience. "Dad, where are you? Vanessa's freaking out about the sprinkler system. It won't shut off." The second call came an hour later. "The coffee maker's acting up, and there's something wrong with the water pressure upstairs." By the fifth call that afternoon, his tone had shifted from annoyed to panicked. "Dad, please call me back. We can't figure out why half the electrical outlets in the kitchen stopped working." I smiled as I listened to each message. The house was speaking for itself, reminding them who really understood its rhythms and needs. Every system I'd installed, every upgrade I'd carefully maintained over the decades, required knowledge they'd never bothered to learn. They'd lived in my house for 2 years, but they'd never really lived with it. Now it was teaching them the difference between ownership and stewardship, between having a deed and truly belonging. Helena's folder revealed the depth of her foresight. Tucked between bank statements and property documents were copies of every permit, every inspection report, every piece of paperwork related to the house's construction. But more than that, she'd documented our entire business history. Photos of custom furniture we'd built for wealthy clients across the state. Testimonials from architects who'd commissioned our work for their most prestigious projects. Awards from craftsmen's guilds that I'd forgotten we'd won. She'd built a portfolio that told the story of William Chambers Fine Woodworking, the company I'd founded 40 years ago and somehow let fade into the background of retirement. At the bottom of the folder was a business license renewal form, already filled out in her handwriting, requiring only my signature. "You never stopped being who you were," her attached note read. "You just forgot to remind the world." Helena had seen this moment coming years before it arrived, and she'd prepared me for battle with the only weapons that truly mattered: truth, documentation, and the kind of patience that comes from building things meant to last forever. The next morning, I drove to the office of Janet Whitmore, the lawyer Helena had recommended in her notes. Janet was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Her office walls were covered with photos of restored historic buildings and preservation awards. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Your wife was a remarkable woman, Mr. Chambers. She called me 2 years ago to discuss this exact scenario." Janet opened a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder with my name on it. "She wanted to make sure you'd have options if anyone ever tried to diminish your legacy. She was particularly concerned about property rights and the business assets tied to your home workshop." The folder contained drafted letters, legal strategies, and a detailed plan that made my head spin. Helena had built me a roadmap back to dignity, one carefully planned step at a time. That afternoon, I made a pilgrimage to the workshop behind the house. Tyler and Vanessa were both at work, so I used my key one last time. The space smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, familiar and comforting as an old song. My tools hung in perfect order on the pegboard walls. Half-finished projects sat on workbenches, waiting for hands that understood their potential. In the corner stood the rocking chair I'd been carving for my first grandchild, should I ever be blessed with one. Every surface told the story of 4 decades spent creating beautiful things for people who appreciated craftsmanship. This wasn't just a workshop. It was a cathedral of creativity, a place where raw wood became heirlooms. I ran my fingers along the grain of a walnut board, feeling the connection between my hands and the tree it had once been. Vanessa saw this space as a cluttered garage that lowered property values. She had no idea she was trying to erase a legacy that stretched back generations, rooted in traditions that money couldn't buy or replace. The attorney's letter arrived at their house on a Wednesday. I wasn't there to see their faces, but I could imagine the moment. Tyler would have opened it, confused by the official letterhead. Vanessa would have snatched it away, her eyes scanning the legal language with growing alarm. The letter was polite but firm, a notice that William Chambers Fine Woodworking was resuming active operations, with the workshop on the property serving as the primary business location. It outlined zoning laws they'd never considered, business licenses they didn't know existed, and property rights that superseded their residential comfort. Janet had crafted it beautifully, using Helena's research to establish my legal claim to operate a business I'd never technically closed. The letter requested their cooperation in accommodating the resumed operations and mentioned that clients would be scheduling appointments for consultations and pickups. Tyler called me 17 times that day. I answered none of them. Each ignored ring felt like a small victory, a crack in the wall of dismissal they'd built around me. Friday arrived with autumn rain that drummed against the motel windows. I knew that across town, Tyler and Vanessa were preparing for their investor meeting, probably arguing about the still malfunctioning sprinkler system and the mysterious electrical issues that seemed to multiply daily. I dressed carefully, my best suit, the one Helena had bought me for our anniversary 3 years ago. At exactly 6 o'clock, I drove to the house I'd built and parked at the curb. Through the windows, I could see their guests arriving, well-dressed people with expensive cars and confident handshakes. I waited until the living room was full, then walked up the front steps and used my key. The conversation stopped when I entered. Tyler's face went white. Vanessa looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Sorry to interrupt," I said pleasantly, "but I need to access the workshop for a client appointment." I held up a clipboard with official-looking documents. "Mr. Peterson is interested in commissioning a dining set." The room buzzed with confusion. Who was Mr. Peterson? What client appointment? I smiled at the investors, introduced myself as the homeowner and business operator, and calmly explained that they were welcome to continue their meeting while I conducted my business. The effect was immediate and devastating. The investors, clearly uncomfortable with the unexpected interruption, began asking questions. Was this a mixed-use property? Were there business operations they hadn't been informed about? What kind of liability issues might that create? Vanessa tried to explain that it was just a misunderstanding, that I was simply Tyler's father who'd been staying with them temporarily. But Janet had prepared me well. I produced the business license, the zoning permits, and documentation showing that the property had always been registered for commercial woodworking operations. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion," I told the confused investors. "This has been the home of William Chambers Fine Woodworking for 40 years. The workshop out back has produced custom furniture for some of the state's most distinguished families." I pulled out photos from Helena's folder, showing pieces we'd created for governors and business leaders. "Perhaps you've heard of the Morrison dining set? Or the custom library we built for the Hartwell estate." Faces around the room began to change as they recognized names and projects they'd heard of before. Over the next hour, I watched Vanessa's carefully planned evening dissolve into chaos. The investors, now aware they'd been considering a property with active business operations, began asking detailed questions about zoning restrictions, noise ordinances, and commercial traffic. Tyler sat in stunned silence as I answered every question with the confidence of someone who'd actually read the fine print. "The workshop operates Monday through Saturday," I explained, "with client consultations typically scheduled in the evenings for their convenience. We've had very few noise complaints over the years, though the occasional sound of power tools is unavoidable during the finishing process." Vanessa's face cycled through shades of red as she realized her perfect investor meeting was becoming a detailed discussion of woodworking operations and property rights. When Mr. Hartwell himself, one of the state's most influential developers, mentioned that he'd been trying to contact William Chambers about a restoration project, her composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He doesn't even live here anymore." The room went quiet. Every eye turned to her, then to me. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, then spoke with the calm authority of someone who'd built everything around us with his own hands. "Actually, Mrs. Chambers," I said, using her married name deliberately, "I believe there's been some confusion about the living arrangements." I pulled out another document from Helena's folder, one Janet had helped me prepare that afternoon. "This is the property deed, which clearly lists William Chambers as the primary owner. The house was built in 1984 using my own construction company, with the workshop designated as commercial space." Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The investors leaned forward, sensing drama. "Now, I've been happy to allow my son and daughter-in-law to stay here while they establish themselves financially," I continued. "But I was never a temporary guest. This is my home, my business, and my legacy." Vanessa stood abruptly, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. "You can't do this," she hissed. "We have rights." I smiled the gentle smile I'd learned from Helena. "Yes," I agreed. "We all have rights. I'm simply exercising mine." The investors left within 20 minutes, making polite excuses about needing to reassess the property situation. I heard car doors slamming, engines starting, opportunities driving away into the rainy night. Tyler and Vanessa stood in their living room, surrounded by the ruins of their evening, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Dad," Tyler said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell was that?" I looked around the room, at the furniture I'd built, the crown molding I'd installed, the hardwood floors I'd sanded and finished. "That," I said, "was me remembering who I am." Vanessa's composure finally shattered. You selfish old man. Do you have any idea what you've just cost us? Tyler's been working toward that promotion for months. I nodded thoughtfully. And for months, you've been working to erase me from my own life. Turnabout, as they say, is fair play. Tyler slumped into the armchair I'd built from oak salvaged from a 19th century barn. For the first time in years, he looked like the confused little boy who used to follow me around the workshop, asking endless questions about wood grain and joint construction. The next morning, I returned to collect my things and found the house in chaos. Water still dripped from the malfunctioning sprinkler system, creating muddy patches across the lawn I'd seeded and maintained for decades. Inside, Tyler sat at the kitchen table surrounded by instruction manuals, his laptop open to YouTube videos about electrical troubleshooting. He looked up when I entered, his face a mixture of exhaustion and something that might have been respect. "The coffee maker's still broken," he said quietly. "And something's wrong with the water heater." I nodded and walked to the utility closet, where I kept a notebook documenting every repair, upgrade, and modification I'd made over the years. I flipped it open to show him pages of careful records, wiring diagrams, and maintenance schedules. "Your mother always said I was obsessive about documentation," I said. She was right. Tyler stared at the notebook like it was written in a foreign language. "I never knew," he whispered, "about any of this. About how much you actually managed." I closed the notebook and tucked it under my arm. "There's a lot you never knew, son, because you never asked." That afternoon, I met with Janet again to discuss the next phase of Helena's plan. She spread contracts across her conference table, each one representing a client who'd been trying to reach me for months. Word had gotten out that William Chambers was back in business, and the response was overwhelming. "The Hartwell restoration project alone will keep you busy for 6 months, Janet said, pointing to a contract worth more than Tyler made in a year. "And Mrs. Morrison wants to commission a complete bedroom set to match her dining room." I signed each contract carefully, feeling something I'd forgotten existed: professional pride. Helena had been right, as usual. I'd never stopped being a master craftsman. I'd just let other people convince me I was past my prime. At 68, I was entering the busiest and most profitable period of my career. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. Vanessa had tried to hide me away, embarrassed by what she saw as an old man puttering around a dusty workshop. She had no idea she'd been living with a legend. The first client meeting took place the following Tuesday. Mrs. Morrison arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, driving a Mercedes that probably cost more than most people's houses. Tyler and Vanessa watched from the kitchen window as I gave her a tour of the workshop, showing her examples of previous work and discussing the bedroom set she wanted to commission. She examined my tools with the reverence of someone who understood quality, running her fingers along the smooth handles worn by decades of use. "My husband always said you were the finest woodworker in the state," she told me. "We've been hoping you'd come out of retirement." When she handed me a check for half the commission fee up front, I heard Vanessa gasp from somewhere behind the kitchen curtains. The amount was more than Tyler's monthly salary. As Mrs. Morrison drove away, I saw neighbors peeking out their windows, curious about the expensive car and the elegant woman who'd spent an hour in my workshop. Word would spread quickly. William Chambers was back. By the end of the week, I'd scheduled 3 more consultations and received calls from 2 architectural firms interested in commissioning custom pieces for high-end homes. Each appointment brought another expensive car to the driveway, another well-dressed client who treated me with the respect and deference that Vanessa had tried to take away. I set up a schedule: consultations on weekday evenings, workshop time during the day, delivery, and installation on weekends. The rhythm felt natural, familiar, like slipping into a comfortable old coat. Tyler began lingering around the workshop during my client meetings, listening to conversations about wood selection, joinery techniques, and finishing processes. I caught him studying my sketches, trying to understand the mathematics of furniture design. For the first time in years, I saw curiosity in his eyes instead of embarrassment. Maybe there was hope for him yet. Maybe Helena's plan included redemption as well as justice. The transformation was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, my workshop had gone from a dusty storage space to the bustling headquarters of a thriving business. Clients' cars filled the driveway. The sound of carefully calibrated power tools hummed through the afternoons. The scent of fresh wood shavings and hand-rubbed finishes replaced the stale air of neglect. I hired 2 apprentices, young craftsmen eager to learn traditional techniques that were disappearing from the modern world. The workshop that Vanessa had wanted to convert into a yoga studio was now generating more income than Tyler's corporate job. The irony was delicious. She'd tried to erase my relevance, only to discover that I was more valuable than she'd ever imagined. The house she'd wanted to redesign around her aesthetic preferences was now famous throughout the state as the home of William Chambers Fine Woodworking. Society pages featured photos of my pieces in million-dollar homes. Interior designers competed for my attention. I'd become exactly what she'd tried to hide: visible, successful, and undeniably important. One evening, as I was closing up the workshop, Tyler appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, watching me clean and organize my tools with the ritual precision of someone who respected his craft. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. I nodded, continuing to wipe down my chisels. "Why didn't you ever tell me how successful you were? How respected?" I paused in my cleaning, considering the question. "I tried to, son. For years, I tried to share what I knew, to teach you the business, to show you what we'd built together. But you were more interested in spreadsheets than sawdust, more impressed by corporate titles than craftsmanship." Tyler's face flushed. I thought you were just a hobbyist. Someone who made furniture for fun." I set down my tools and looked at him directly. "Your mother understood. She saw the artistry, the business potential, the legacy we were creating. She knew that what we built with our hands was worth more than anything we could create with computers." Tyler's eyes filled with something that looked like grief. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know." The apology hung in the air between us, fragile as spun glass. I wanted to accept it immediately, to bridge the gulf that had opened between us over the years. But Helena's voice echoed in my memory. "Love without respect is just sentiment, William. Make sure he understands the difference." I nodded slowly. "Apologies are a start, Tyler. But understanding comes from action, not words." I gestured around the workshop, at the half-finished pieces and the careful organization that represented decades of discipline. "If you really want to understand what you've been dismissing, then learn it. Spend time here. Ask questions. Get your hands dirty." Tyler looked around the space with new eyes, seeing the complexity and precision he'd previously ignored. "Would you teach me?" he asked quietly. "The way you tried to when I was young?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. This was what I'd wanted for years, what I'd dreamed of during the long, lonely evenings when he'd been too busy with his corporate career to visit. "We'll see," I said. "Learning this kind of work requires patience, dedication, and respect for the process. Are you ready for that?" Over the following weeks, Tyler began showing up at the workshop after his regular job, still wearing his business clothes, but rolling up his sleeves to learn. I started him with basic tasks: sanding, sorting wood, organizing tools. I watched him struggle with the patience that handwork required, his corporate-trained mind wanting to rush through processes that demanded careful attention. But slowly, something began to change. His hands, soft from years of desk work, began to develop calluses. His movements became more deliberate, more thoughtful. He started asking questions about grain patterns, wood species, and traditional joinery techniques. I found myself explaining concepts I'd taken for granted, sharing knowledge that had been passed down through generations of craftsmen. It wasn't just woodworking I was teaching him. It was the philosophy of creation, the meditation of careful work, the satisfaction that comes from building something meant to last. For the first time in years, we had something to talk about besides weather and work schedules. Vanessa's response to the workshop's success was predictably bitter. She watched from the kitchen windows as clients arrived and departed, her face tight with resentment. The extra income should have pleased her, but it represented everything she'd tried to eliminate: the mess, the noise, the reminder that her husband came from people who worked with their hands. She began leaving real estate brochures around the house, highlighting properties in developments far from my workshop. "We could afford something really nice now," she'd say, not quite looking at Tyler. "Something modern, something that's really ours." But Tyler had begun to change. He'd started wearing work clothes to the workshop, and sawdust clung to his hair when he came in for dinner. His hands, once soft and pale, were developing the confident grip of someone learning to handle tools with purpose. When Vanessa complained about the noise and the traffic, he defended the workshop for the first time. "It's Dad's business," he said quietly. "It's part of who he is." The look she gave him could have frozen fire. The final confrontation came on a Thursday evening in October. I was working late, putting finishing touches on a cherrywood cabinet for the Hartwell project, when Vanessa stormed into the workshop. Her face was flushed with wine and fury, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled. "This has to stop," she announced, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I didn't sign up to live in a furniture factory. I didn't marry into some blue-collar dynasty. This is supposed to be our home, not your memorial to the good old days." I continued working, applying stains with care, even strokes. "Actually," I said without looking up, "you married into exactly what you're complaining about. Tyler is the son of a craftsman, the grandson of a furniture maker. This is his heritage, whether you approve or not." She stepped closer, her voice rising. "He has a real career, a professional job. He doesn't need to play around in your dusty old workshop." I finally looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Playing? This workshop generates more income than his professional job. This dusty old space has created pieces that will outlast both of us. What legacy is his corporate career building?" The question silenced her, but only for a moment. Then she played her final card, the one I'd been expecting since this whole battle began. "If you don't shut down this ridiculous workshop," she said, her voice cold and calculated, "Tyler and I are leaving. We'll find our own place, and you can live here alone with your precious wood shavings." I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her ultimatum. Then I smiled, the same gentle smile Helena used to give me when she knew something I didn't. "Vanessa," I said, "that's the first sensible thing you've said since you moved in." Her face went white. "You can't be serious." I set down my brush and turned to face her fully. "I built this house for my family, not for people who are ashamed of where they come from. If Tyler chooses to leave with you, I'll be disappointed but not surprised. If he chooses to stay and learn what his grandfather and I have to teach him, then he'll have a legacy worth more than any corporate promotion." As if summoned by our voices, Tyler appeared in the workshop doorway. His hair was dusted with sawdust, his sleeves rolled up, a chisel in his hand. He looked from his wife to his father, and for the first time in years, I saw the man I'd raised him to be. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. "This is where I belong." Today, 5 years later, Tyler runs William Chambers Fine Woodworking alongside me. We've trained dozens of apprentices, created pieces for museums and mansions, and built a legacy that will outlast us both. Vanessa found her modern house in a sterile development, far from the messy beauty of creation. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for your life is remove themselves from it. Helena's plan didn't just save my dignity. It revealed the truth about who valued family and who valued image. The workshop still hums with activity every day, filled with the sound of careful hands shaping something meant to last. That's what legacy really means, not what you accumulate, but what you create that outlives you. If you believe in the power of honoring your legacy, please share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories about standing up for what matters most.